Hello, everyone, and welcome to Embodying Your Design Open House Part 2. So, over the past couple weeks, we've gotten a lot of questions in our DMs about the intersection of somatics and human design. So, today we're really going to be focusing on those questions that have come through. Starting with this important fact that finding safety in the body, right, is really the premise before you can take on the experiment, right? You have to find safety in the body so that we can get beyond mere survival mode, because that's what the body's good at doing. It's good at keeping you safe, right? But at what cost, right? And so, in my own life experience, I struggled to find safety in my body in my 20s, and I suffered from anxiety and panic attacks and some degree of hypochondria. All of that is in my chart, actually, 100%. Overreacting to bodily sensations. So I benefited personally from homeopathy at the time, which I used psychiatrically, right? And also from different somatic and mindfulness practices. And I can tell you that I haven't had any anxiety in 15 years, so it is resolvable. But it was this panicked kind of survival energy that would really overtake me, and it would drive my thoughts and lead me to, take a lot of actions that weren't, in alignment. This is really a clear thing. When you work with clients over time, it becomes very apparent that most people really don't feel safe in their bodies, actually, right? And so that's kind of the first thing to address before you can take on the experiment. Is there anything that you would add, Teresa?
Yeah, I would add just something really simple about how when we start getting curious, kind of exploring our bodies and using interoception and getting curious about sensation, we start realizing that safety might be more available to us than we thought. Because a lot of us look at our bodies as this global system, right? Oh, I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling anxious everywhere. But actually, starting to practice with titration and pendulation and these really kind of simple somatic practices, you can see, oh, wait, I do have safety available to me. I just didn't know because I was so wrapped up in the anxiety that I'm feeling. Maybe it's in my toes or it's in the tip of my nose. For me, like I often feel safety in my low back. So I could be feeling a lot of sensation in my stomach and a lot of anxiety, but I can start tuning into the safety in my low back at the same time or going back and forth between the two. And so I think it's actually noticing what is really available to us, and that
Hmm.
can make a really big difference.
Yeah, taking an inventory check. I have pain in my low back, Teresa. I can't imagine finding safety in my low back.
Yeah, everybody's different.
Oh, it's the last place I would look. Um, and we all know about the concept of amplification, right? So it's really important to be able to recognize when these external influences are knocking us off center and how to come back to ourselves, right? So the key is to be really familiar with your design so that you can notice what I call those foreign invaders, right? So, for example, if you have an undefined solar plexus, right? And maybe that's your only undefined motor. So, energy to you is emotion, right? And if you have maybe, let's say, a dormant gate six there, then, emotion leads to conflict, so your mind makes these links, oh, I don't want to have that conversation. And then you have the stories that justify why you can't, right? But below all that is a difficult experience that we need to identify. We need to learn how to meet and be with, to be present with those external inputs. Because really, everyone on planet Earth has essentially the same task to either be present to their own emotions, their own emotional chemistry, or the others, right? Whether your own chemistry to find equanimity in your own chemistry or equanimity around others' chemistry, right? And if you have an undefined solar plexus, to realize that's not me and not place any identification there, to realize the triggers so that you know to leave the room, right? Maybe you need to leave the room before you can have that direct, difficult conversation. There's no switch that you can just flip, in order to get yourself out of that state. There are practices to help you start to center and regulate. But the most important awareness might be to say, I'm really overwhelmed and I'm triggered. You're right. This is an important conversation, but I need to leave the room right now so I can gather myself, so I can center, right? So there's a lot of sensations there to get familiar with and work through. Teresa, anything that you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, so in embodying your design, we're going to be really going into different trauma responses and how they show up. And some of you might be able to track those trauma responses to your openness. This is kind of data that we're all starting to collect. And for me, I tend to go towards a fawn response and I have a wide open ego. Open egos are easily intimidated, right? So we can start to kind of make connections here. And for me, starting to notice the sensation that I'm feeling when I'm amplifying ego energy and when I go into feeling intimidated and feel like I need to fawn and pause and say, can I be with this sensation that I'm trying to avoid? Because the fawn response that I go into is me trying to avoid that sensation. And maybe I still fawn, but at least I'm pausing and having awareness and starting to notice the behavior that comes from the sensation. So that's what we're really trying to help you guys do is make these connections. What behavior is coming from the sensation? What sensation am I trying to avoid? Can I be with that amplification in my body? Or like James said, do I need to remove myself from the situation? And it's really just realizing what you have available to you in order to regulate.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so in my case, I have two undefined centers, my spleen and my root. And for me, energy is stress. That's the link, And so I remember back in the day before I was teaching human design, being in corporations, no matter what I had on my plate, if anyone gave me one more task, it took me into overwhelm. So I really had to sit with those feelings of overwhelm that just drive me into this panic, this urgency, this hyper aroused urgency that the way to relieve all of that is just to get it done, you know? And so it was a matter of just slowly developing capacity to hold more of that stress without letting it unseat me, right?
Mm.
Uncenter me. Yeah. So this is a really important one, uncovering the somatic underpinnings of not self behaviors, right? And building capacity for discomfort. So the conditioning, you're going to, by exploring this somatically, you're going to see where the conditioning is still active, right? Allowing you to work with it directly in your body, right? Conditioning actually shows up in the body first. First you're mentally programmed unknowingly, right? And then you find out how you've been conditioned by your unconscious behaviors. So one of the key things that we want to teach you here is interoception, which is just a fancy word that says the ability to read what's going on in your body. Right. So with interoception, you can discover and learn how to track the somatic underpinnings of your not self behaviors. Because I want to be really clear that the field is very oriented toward learning about the not self, right? Which is really a set of formulas that your mind abides by, right? It's the structure by which your mind operates. And you become more objective to that, which can, let's say, disembed your witness consciousness, right? And you can catch these kind of mental stories throughout the day that want to pull you further into the conditioned program, right? But what also needs to happen in the experiment is to to address all of the past conditioning, which is in your cells, right? Which is in your cells. That's why it's a 7-year deconditioning process. So what actually holds the not self behaviors in place is a somatic experience. It's a sensation that we don't know how to be with. It's there's beliefs around it, there's stories around it, but the actual thing that holds it in place is a difficult somatic experience that we don't know how to be with. But to learn how to be with that gradually, right, through titration, right, just gradually growing your capacity is what starts to unwind those patterns. Anything you want to add, Teresa?
Yeah, I just want to say before I started interoception, somatic work, I could mentally track when I was going into my not self, but I couldn't actually make changes. Like I
Yeah.
was still acting out of my not self all the time because my mind would say, "Oh, you're in your not self," and I'd be like, "I'm still doing this," you know? And I don't know if anybody can relate to that, but what actually started making changes, and like I even had an experience yesterday where I noticed myself starting to fawn with a friend of mine when she did something that bothered me. And it's because the sensation of being with that feeling of telling her the truth was so uncomfortable. And I really had to take a step back and be like, I can feel this. I can be with this sensation. My mind is trying to avoid that by fawning. And I said, you know what? I have to tell you the truth, blah, blah, blah. And I was able to like be with the discomfort and not go into that automatic fawn response, right? So change is slow, but it doesn't come just from knowing intellectually what our not self is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a really important big missing piece of the puzzle, I think, in the field is not doing the somatic piece, because it is helpful to catch your mind stories, and that kind of prevents further conditioning, but you still have to work with the programming in the cells. So next, and this is a really big one, it's distinguishing trauma responses from inner authority, right? There's this misconception that all correct decisions should be perfectly smooth and easy and not have any associated discomforts, right? And of course, there are those moments where things line up, where there's serendipity. Absolutely, that does happen, right? But, when I think about my own life experiences, like I remember, so I was always an entrepreneur, and I remember starting a company and raising money, and it was correct to get into. I had the energy, I was emotionally comfortable for it. But then, of course, you have difficult conversations sometimes. You have these moments where it's make or break, and of course, anxiety is going to come up. Of course, questions of worthiness are going to come up, of legitimacy, and all these sorts of things, right? So it's a nuanced situation. So, sometimes it is correct to take on that bold new opportunity or that new relationship, right? Because it's the right stretch for you. That's your growth edge. And there's still going to be discomfort surrounding it, and yet it can be your correct decision. Any examples for you, Teresa, that you want to share?
Yeah, I think something that I've noticed is my inner authority is a lot more subtle than my trauma responses. And,
Yeah.
and also our trauma responses are so conditioned and it's for our survival. So when you look at yourself as this being that's conditioned to have this survival response to keep you alive, we have
Mm,
to recognize that as that's actually something beautiful. And there comes a point when it's preventing us from truly self-actualizing and truly following our inner authority. So
hmm.
it's so sneaky, and that's where the somatic stuff comes in because I've been able to start clocking, oh, my inner authority actually feels this way, and it's really subtle compared to this trauma response that's like trying to get me to do certain things to keep me safe, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And we've traded notes, Teresa, about client work and how some clients have thought that they were, say, got a response or they were following their inner authority, but it turns out they were very identified with a certain part of themselves, a protector part or something like that, because it's so easy, guys, to let your mind can just get you pumped about something. And you think that you're actually, say, as a generator, having a response, but your mind is just getting you pumped about it and it's justifying it. Right. So it is sneaky, subtle stuff. I mean, this is one of the things. It's like this information is so amazing, but Ra naively thought that he's going to tell generators to wait. I mean, this is a quote. I thought if I just told generators to wait to respond, I would change the world. He just was naive about what it would actually take. He's got the right information, but how do we actually implement it practically? That's what we're trying to do here. Okay. So differentiating somatically informed fear from mentally conditioned fear. This is a really big one, right? And let's think about the spleen, for example, here. I mean, all awareness centers are made up of fear gates. Okay. But let's focus on the spleen for a moment. And so one of the things I've seen is the people that struggle with the most fear actually have their personality sun in the spleen, whether it's defined or undefined. And they might be people who are incredibly intuitive or instinctive or whatever, but they also struggle to see sometimes, well, what's the intuition here, right? Versus what's the story, right? It's really important to kind of separate because the mind is going to work with the chemistry that's there. So when you have a defined spleen, you have fears that are meant to inform, what you do to protect you and so on. And that's great. We want to honor those. But where is the mind running with the chemistry and leading you astray? And that leads us into the next point, which is really clarifying inner knowing versus the mind. And by inner knowing here, I mean it could be intuition, it could be your cognition, some sort of what we could call irrational or transrational knowing. I just know. I just know. I don't know why I know. It doesn't have to be logically justified or defended or backed up by facts. You know because you know. That's something that individual circuitry does. That's a gift that certain cognitions have, right? Or splenic activations. You just know. And the difference is that this kind of a knowing, let's say using the example of, I don't know, gate 57, this gate of intuition, the gentle, right? On one hand, there's this knowing that can just show up in your awareness as a sound, right? As a succinct phrase. And it just says go, right? Or stay, or don't. It's very simple. It doesn't, intuition doesn't speak in grammatically correct sentences and paragraphs and chains of reasoning. It just pops into your awareness. And in addition to that, in the case of someone with a defined spleen, let's say with gate 57, there's often somatic indicators that I've tracked with clients, such as goosebumps or chills, the hair stands up on the back of your arms, this kind of a thing. For me, I have 57, both my Plutos dormant, right, in my undefined spleen. When I get an intuitive knowing, it's a jolt, actually. It's this jolt that grabs my attention. So it's a process of really sifting out the difference between the inner knowing, which shows up between your ears in the same ballpark, if you will, in the same neighborhood as your thought, but it's not thought, right? And distinguishing the difference between the two. Very, very important because we all have some sort of a, call it again, irrational or transpersonal knowing, a woo woo knowing, right? And it's really important to recognize what that is, make room for it, integrate it.
Yeah, I
Anything you want
found
to
that
add?
my
Yeah.
spleen, I mean, I have a spleen and a defined solar plexus and a defined sacral, but I found that my spleen really can speak to me in terms of just like my safety, my well-being, or even just some simple little mundane things sometimes. Like one time I was leaving my house and I was going somewhere with my husband where he needed a specific set of keys, and I heard grab the keys as we were leaving, and I totally wrote it off and ignored it because I was like, he always has his keys. And then we get there and he forgot his keys. And so sometimes it's just these very like it's not complete sentences. It'll be like two words sometimes. Um, but it's very quick, and because I have a defined spleen, that's probably coming from there, but it might show up differently for different people depending on what you've
Yeah.
got.
Yeah. And an important thing. So what Teresa just said, she's got a very defined chart, so she's got a defined, your inner authority is called emotional generated, right? Because you got to define sacral and define emotional system. And yet in matters of safety, the spleen always vetoes everything else, right? So if Teresa just gets a hit, don't get in the car, there's no emotional authority process to wait through. There's some nonsense out on Facebook. I mean, this is at least a year old where people who don't have emotional authority think that you would have an emotional process for 100% of everything. It is not the case. It is not the case, right? So there's a lot of information being put forth by people who aren't really observing, that don't have that chemistry first off, or they're not really tracking that with client work the way Teresa and I have for years. So, again, you have to make room for all these things. If Teresa has to make a big life decision, do I want to buy a home? That's a matter of her emotional authority being comfortable with that. Do I have the energy to go through all the work that it takes to do that? Do I feel comfortable with that? Right. But if she somewhere in the process just gets a hit about safety, you honor that in the moment. Right. So we want to find where all of these different things apply, make room for them, get really fluent with how we have these kind of irrational knowings that are really there to protect us. Now Ross says that having a splenic authority, for example, is like having no inner authority at all. But actually, what I have seen is that 9 times out of 10, my splenic clients will tell me that they knew that they shouldn't have done whatever. They knew it. It's not the recognizing it that is usually the hardest part, right? If you have some capacity for embodiment, it's the honoring it, it's the believing it, it's the trusting it. And that can take some trial and error to see, I had a hit that this was not going to be good. I didn't honor it. And I've lived through the pain of that a few times, So it's quite a thing to hand your safety over to this primitive intelligence, because we've been so conditioned to think that we're safe by being rational and strategic and so on, right? So I want to break those habits. So, any questions or comments so far? And just to let you know, we are also going to do some live demos today. But any questions or comments about anything we've talked about so far? Does everything make sense? Yeah. I think it's a really big thing to kind of understand that, like, for example, that trauma can impede your ability to tune into your inner authority. Your trauma response can be confused for your inner authority. And that the not self, while yes, learn about the mental formulas and the stories and the way your mind tries to sabotage, but realize that the pattern is actually held in place by a sensation you can't meet, not by anything in your mind. It's by a sensation you can't meet. There might be corollary beliefs and stories around it that you need to look at and let go of. But essentially, the underpinning is a sensation that you can't meet. Just looking in the chat. Betty said, I'm a little confused, but I'm sure it will integrate really interesting concepts to grapple with. Sure. Yeah. Let us know if you have a question. It does take some time for this to land.
Yeah, like I understood this stuff intellectually for a while, but it took like consistent practices to start really seeing some changes. So totally makes sense
Yeah.
that it's confusing at first.
Yeah. Or Teresa, for example, you and I were talking. I mean, it probably was a month ago at this point, and you were saying, um, I intellectually understood what you were saying, James, about the not self and how it's really in the cells and how trauma can get in the way of the experiment. But it took you actually years to kind of really grok experientially what I was pointing at.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sort of simple to say, but it's quite another thing to really grasp. Jen said, I'm a mental projector with smell cognition, and I relate to what you both said about the spleen, even though mine is undefined. I don't need to always process things through my authority, voicing it out, soundboarding. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great example. So, one other thing to say about this is cognition is more generally available than strategy and authority. So, one of the things I want to clarify is, where does strategy apply? Where does inner authority apply? Where does cognition apply? Because as simple as it is to just say this, this is where everyone gets tripped up. They confuse strategy for inner authority, right? So the projector that can just move about and do whatever they need to do throughout the day is confused, thinking they need an invitation where they don't, right? So you have to understand, where does strategy apply? Where does inner authority apply? And then recognize it's actually your cognition that is most available to you. Okay. Really important. So last comment here in the chat before we take some questions. Jen said, I'm learning that I'm feeling cognition helped a lot since I have an undefined spleen. It's a feeling, an inner knowing. Yeah, it means you're energetically sensitive. Teresa's got feeling cognition as well.
Mhm.
You're an aura reader, and to help regulate your nervous system with feeling cognition, it could be anything that's got energy that feels good to you, whether crystal or whatever the case might be. Yeah. Um, Anna.
Hey,
Hi.
yeah, I have two questions. I'm always a bit confused with like being non-emotional. Like my partner and I, we're both non-emotional,
Mm,
but I mean we do, and but we when we're together, we are emotionally defined. And so
yeah.
I'm wondering, if we are not feeling ours emotions, whose emotions are we feeling? Because I do feel a lot of emotions, especially when we're fighting, and so does he. So yeah, could you explain that a little?
Sure. So one thing to say is everyone has emotions, but not everyone has an emotional process. Very key. Now, I also want to make another distinction. When you are undefined emotionally, you do have less emotion, right? It is less quantity wise, right? But you have emotion and you're going to process things emotionally sometimes, but you don't consistently need to process things emotionally. Now, in your composite chart, your relationship is a conditioning force for the both of you. So your relationship experience is emotional. So even though you both might be spontaneous, the relationship itself cannot change spontaneously. The relationship itself dictates that you take some time to go through an emotional process together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
You,
Yeah.
you know, there's both parties, and then there's this third entity, if you will, that is the relationship, which conditions you're beholden to that composite. And it's a great example because it's like two unemotional people, and suddenly they've got a very different life experience together, which can be really disorienting if you don't have the benefit of this information, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I have some
yeah,
friends that have that same situation. They're both non-emotional and then come together and have a ton of emotional definition. And it's so interesting watching them be in emotional process, but it's only together. Like it's only when it involves each other and their relationship and in their own separate lives, they're making their quick decisions, whatever. And then I think they can do that together and they're really confused as to why things are taking a while to pan out and why they have to go through this big process. But you can
yeah,
just look at it as that's where you're learning about emotions and what an opportunity to learn about it in the relationship.
yeah,
Hmm. Thank you so much. That really makes sense to me. Like things really take time and it can be frustrating. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. I had a second question. So I'm also a mental projector and I have inner vision. And I still haven't, so I feel pretty comfortable in my soundboarding process now, especially since I have so I've been entering in my human design education while I've started to work on my nervous system. And so I really felt like so I really resonate with everything you're sharing. And I just wanted to share some recognition that I really
Mhm.
appreciate what you're it makes a lot of sense to me. And I've
Mm,
always noticed that I had to pause in like what I was learning in human design and integrate somatically and like be more in regulating and somatic works and but I still don't really I don't have clarity on like how my inner vision really how does work how does it work for me or how can it support my soundboarding process.
yeah, I mean, so one thing about inner vision is that it's simply you're tuning out from the external environment, right? So it's a soft gaze. So, for example, in the context of this session, you don't need to be making eye contact with Teresa or I, or even looking at the screen very much. I mean, you can kind of glance, but it's more about just allow yourself to naturally disconnect. Remember, the cognition is happening from the brain, from the unconscious. It's not something you have to tell yourself to do. It naturally wants to occur. We're giving you a signpost to just notice that. The best way to approach the human design experiment is through gentle noticing. Don't force anything. Don't try to do anything. It's giving you a signpost to gently notice, but you will, with inner vision, naturally tune out of the outside world and kind of go inward. And as you go inward, there's visual data there that can help you navigate, right? And when you have inner vision, one of the other things that you do, one of the other things that will be a part of your soundboarding process, irregardless of what's on the surface, I don't even need to know that, but it will be reflecting on the past. It will be reflecting on the past because inner vision correlates with the stream that has to do with the past experiences that we've been through and what did they mean and what sense did we make. So watch for part of your process to be I'm reflecting on the past. I've got this visual data that I have access to when I naturally find myself tuning out of the external environment. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, even though I'm surprised by like the first comment you made on because I do like observing people who, for example, right now, I do enjoy like watching you and I feel like I'm catching a lot of information while observing.
Well,
Um,
there can be other things in your chart, right? You could have outer vision in your environment, for example, or you could have other things in the surface of your chart, but you have to allow room for both. So we're not doing like a holistic chart analysis, but you have to kind of
Mm.
see that there might be a part of you based on other things that you have that wants to do that, but it can't be all of that. If you have inner vision, you have to make room as well for tuning out, tuning out and tuning in, which is actually, how you connect with the session like this, how you learn, how you really take it in. So there's nuances to all these sorts of things. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you can also notice how it might support you in your somatic practices. Like maybe for you, like some somatic practices that I do, I'll say look for something in the room that feels safe in your body to stare at. For you, it might be you're closing your eyes and you're visualizing something, or a
Mhm.
memory is coming in, or it might be more of an internal process for you to play with and like noticing what you're visualizing and what's dropping in internally and how that affects your body somatically.
Mhm. Great. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, and one other thing, I mean, I'm certainly not going to be volunteering birth time rectifications to all the students, but if through the practices we see that, wait, you're just not connecting with it, like when you're inner vision, I don't know how close you are to outer vision, right? So there's these sorts of questions, right? So again, a rectification is a whole process into itself. But if in the live demos, you're like, you know what, I'm just not connecting with this, it can take a quick look and say, you're 5 minutes away from being outer vision. Are you actually someone who needs your food to look visually appealing and your home environment needs to be visually appealing? And you've got this logical pattern recognition. And if you go to a friend's house you haven't been to in 3 months, you're going to notice that they've moved a painting on the wall. That this way, that's out of place, that you've got a mental model almost visually for the entire environment, and or you're judging people visually. But a very important distinction about this is outer vision isn't an analytical judgment. It isn't, oh, I don't really like what they're wearing. And, it's just a quick hit that something doesn't feel right about that person based on the visual data that I'm getting. And to say, hey, that doesn't make me superficial. Again, this isn't a condition thing. This is my unconscious. This is my brain telling me who's right for me. Right. So these are the sort of things that, well, I'm sure someone in this program is going to discover their birth time's a bit off as we play with really going deeper here. So anyway, I'm not saying that yours is, but I'm just simply saying that's a part of this process. My birth time was an hour off, guys. I was years into my experiment and practicing being a direct light person, PHS wise. 2 years in, and I was like, you know what? I've got clients that are really having all these breakthroughs. I'm not. And I went through a process with my mentor where we rectified it. I had a new cognition, new PHS, lines of my moons changed. That was the big stuff. But anyhow, this is where I want to give you guys the right tools to really see what is really going on so we can kind of course correct early in your journey if need be. Salongo, hi.
Hi. So about the spleen, undefined spleen and all the awareness centers, I know what it sounds like, in terms of a response to anything in the moment. I'm curious about the open spleen, undefined spleen people, because I'll never know what it's like 'cause I have it defined. Differentiating between what they're picking up from other people when they're in public aura versus when they're just by themselves. How does the spleen
Mhm.
talking, to protect and the safety? You can speak to that
Yeah,
because you have it open. So I'd like to
sure.
kind of understand that because I'll never know. So I need to
Right.
understand it intellectually per se.
So there's a lot of nuances. It would depend on whether that person's spleen is undefined, meaning you've got a dormant gate or several there, completely open, right? Or really what's going on. So for me, I've got a dormant 57 twice and a dormant 48. So I do inconsistently get these intuitive hits, for example, about what's coming around the corner because 57's tapped into the future, right? And so there's strange things that I know sometimes. Um, and sometimes it's on a collective level, just knowing who's going to get elected or what's going to happen to the country, right? And I've got that collective activation there with 48 as well. But for me, it's like, remember that when you don't have definition, you have the capacity for objectivity, for witnessing, right? And so I was always a diagnostician. I used to be in a relationship with a woman that had 3 children, and I was the first one that knew when any of them were sick, even when they were barely presenting any symptoms. So we had numerous conversations where it was like, oh, he's coming down with something. Oh, no, he's just got a sniffle. I'm like, no, he's coming down with something. I can feel people's mm, health condition, so to speak, in my body. I can feel when they're fatigue, just not right in some way. I don't have the ability to, I'm certainly not like a, what's the word? A medical intuitive, but just generally, I kind of know if something's off. So that's the thing. And so it's like, again, having those dormant activations, I have intuition when I need it. I don't have it as often as Teresa does with her defined spleen, but I have it when I need it. But it's like there's a lot to say about having an undefined spleen. I'd also could tell you that as a kid growing up, I somaticized stress, right? Because spleen is body awareness, right? So like I was taking on all these external things and they would show up in me as illness, right? So it's a complicated subject. Does that help you grasp it a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. So like that last part where you said others, and if you're not aware or just not connected with your body, then you become this vessel that transmutes other people's stuff. Um, with the undefined spleen, um, the difference between picking up on others, the intuitive knowing and other things of the hanging gates, and knowing what's yours, so
Yeah. There's a,
that
there's
must
a
be
there's a
that
journey
there has to be an
around.
evolution, right? Yeah.
Yeah, knowing what exactly. Yeah, it's a rich conversation, and we're going to do a class
Hmm.
just on the centers,
Hmm.
and kind of go deep into these questions because it's like there's what does a healthy defined spleen look like?
Like,
What does an unhealthy defined spleen look like? What does a healthy undefined spleen look like? And so on. There's all these different variations depending.
Right. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Jen had another question in the chat. Does strategic or receptive mind play into what somatic practices might be most effective? I don't know that we've really talked about this, James. I mean, you're strategic, I'm receptive. I don't know that we've really like compared our experiences because at least for me, like the exercises themselves are kind of the same across the board, and what the way that you experience them might be different, of course, based on your configuration. Um, I could like make something up with my logical mind as to like what that might look like, but I don't know for sure. And it's more of an exploratory practice to see how that might show up for you during the practice.
Yeah, I agree. I would say it's still an exploratory, yeah, question. Yeah, we don't have firm data to kind of say one way or the other.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, or should we go to a couple live demos? Okay.
Wondering if, because we're going to do Sarah Jane and Michelle, I'm wondering if either of them are on a time crunch, like if one of them needs to go first.
That is a great question. Either one of you in a time
I'm
crunch?
fine for time.
You're
You're
fine.
fine for time?
Michelle, how
Great.
about
Sarah
you?
Jane?
The same. I'm
Same.
fine.
Okay, cool. I'm going to take a
Great.
quick break. I'll be right back.
Okay. Let's all just take a 1 minute break, 2 minute break. Okay, let's get started again. So, from the perspective of the challenge for Sarah Jane, we can say pretty succinctly that it's all about fear, right? So, for because she's got fear, motivation, and survival view, this is someone that could be hypochondriac, overreact to what's going on in their body, concerned about health and or money. What do I need to do for my survival? What do I need to do for security? And her biggest problem is really, is the world safe? Is the environment safe? Is it safe to be myself with other people? And there's a link between um, emotionality, right, and conflict. Emotions equal conflict. Emotions are overwhelming. I don't know if I can handle it. I don't know if I'm safe in an emotional environment. It tends to lead to conflict, right, because of the dormant gate six here. Now, the thing is, gate six is a very significant gate because it is the source of all of the emotional intelligences and streams, right? And what gate six is all about is it's about having conflicts that are productive, that are fruitful, right? Not conflicts that are traumatizing and shut you down, right? But conflicts that are fruitful. So Sarah Jane's ability to really grow and mature, which is what six is all about, has to do with her ability to face these conflicts, to not be uncentered by other people's emotions, to not link emotion with fear, right? So I'm just going to pause there. Um, Sarah Jane, what's coming up for you around that?
Uh, it's incredibly interesting. I'd give you just one example. I realized today I have to have a difficult conversation with my neighbors about not managing to be the fire alarm person I was meant to be for the last however long. And my first reaction is, I think I need to move. It's a
Hmm.
genuine feeling of, oh, if this isn't going to work, I'm in a shared experience, it's not going to work. And I've really had to go to myself, that's me wanting to break the bond rather than sit with the fact that I didn't do the thing that I needed to do. And they're really good at getting those things, their bits done. They're just a bit more
Mm.
on it than I am. And I've just got to accept. So that rings very true to me. The conflict of I'm fine on my own. It's just me and other people.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I'm curious what sensations come up in your body when you sit with that feeling. Like, what can you describe that to us?
I mean, yeah, it's just failure. It just goes. I think it goes immediately to the extreme that my failure to do this makes me therefore an unacceptable member of the group, and I need to get my bags ready.
Right.
You
And what do you feel in your body when you're thinking I'm a failure?
know, my tummy gets really, really tight.
Hmm.
Hmm.
I get really hot, so I get like these waves of heat that come up through, like from my toes, like whoosh, kind
Yeah.
of, kind
What
of
does that
feeling.
what does that feel like for you to go whoosh like that?
Well, actually, doing it here and now, I feel quite up, upbeat and full of energy.
Yeah.
But I equate that feeling with being in trouble.
Mm-hmm. So
Um,
that's what we
so
would call an overcoupling. So at some point in your life, you had a trauma or a situation where you experienced getting in trouble, and that sensation came about. And then now your body automatically says, oh, when that sensation comes about, that means I'm in trouble. So we're trying to uncouple that by doing that somatic practice and saying, oh, wait, this is actually just a sensation in my body. I can be with this. You just showed us you can be with it, right? So now this is just showing yourself that you can be with the sensation and start to slowly uncouple that. And that can take a while to uncouple. It's not just going to be one little practice. You're going to have to really kind of work towards that. But just having that awareness of like, oh, I'm overcoupling that, right?
I really like the language you use actually, because what I can say is the only way I've been able to make space for that discomfort is by stopping everything and
Mhm.
starting my experiment proper. Like I thought I was understanding human design, but really my experiment started in February, even though I've been looking at it for about 3 years. It's like in February it went, oh, you have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a physics. Can't just
Hey,
keep
I did
breathing
it.
it
I
and
did it
writing
too.
it out.
I
We
think
all
a
did
lot of
that.
us do that.
We all
Yeah.
did that.
I think a lot
So,
of us that are drawn to this system are very cerebral people. And then we kind of totally miss the point that it's about the body, right?
100%. And I had to literally physically stop and stay at home to be able to understand what's my feet. I now understand because I have an open solar plexus, what's
Yeah.
actually belongs to me.
Yeah, and it's really just a sensation underneath that too that we're working with. So it's actually it's very simple. Like, and that's the thing, like human design foundational teachings are very simple, but and so are somatic teachings, but it's not easy, right? So
I think the other example I could give with regard, like with the 41, my open route, like I just trying to use my dad's printer, I feel like I am taking up too much time and I speed up to finish the task because I feel like I am in someone else's time because maybe they're in a rush. So suddenly then I'm in a rush. So when I'm around people, I look like a maniac, like because I'm always like in this massive rush. But actually, on my own, I'm like a cat, just like plodding about. And it's really shocking to
Mhm.
realize I've been operating like that for 47 years.
That's great though that you can
Yeah.
notice the contrast. And then the next step would be to start noticing the sensation that's going with that feeling of being rushed. And maybe the first time you're just noticing it and you're still being rushed and you're still like watching your body do that. But then maybe the next time you're kind of interrupting and you're like, wait, I'm going to pause for 10 seconds and be with the sensation of I'm feeling rushed and I need to go faster. Right. So it's
Yeah.
like slowly over time, it's like flexing a muscle. We're just building our capacity to be with those sensations that the not self creates.
yeah. And just to add something, part of the psychological material here is, and I'm not going to explain the analysis, but this isn't a design that rushes on your own accord. It's exactly what you just said. It's a design that says, I need to move faster to keep up with the world. I need to move faster for other people. Other people make me rush. Okay. So then there's psychic material there to look at. What are the stories? What are the beliefs? And then what's the sensation below that? Yeah. Hmm. Okay. You feel complete for the moment, Sarah Jane? Great. Okay.
Mentally complete. I
Thank
think,
you
well,
so
one
much.
Awesome.
is one thing that's just really helpful is just the fact that that's so clear. You
Mm.
know, there's a lot going on that page, but I can really get to grips in my daily life with that physical information, if that makes sense. So yeah, thank you both.
That is our aim. Yeah, it's good to hear. Thank you. Michelle, are you with us?
Oh, hello, I am.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Okay. So I can see in this chart, this is someone who could become hypo aroused or hyper aroused, right? Depending, right? And this is someone who can be really driven, right, to do various things for sake of worthiness and love, and potentially over giving in order to get affection from friends and family. So this is someone who the extent to which you're caught up in the undefined ego conditioning is the extent to which every now and then you get kind of burned out, you go too far. Saturn has to show you the limits, and you need to take time to yourself to recuperate. So it's like, I'm just so driven, right? Driven why? For worthiness, to prove yourself, and to get love because of the dormant 40 activation, right? I need to do something. There can be, and there likely is, a link between I need to do something, I need to perform in a certain way so that I'm worthy of love. And part of that story is, I need to provide, I need to be supportive, and this sort of a thing. And you can be supportive. You are tribal, but where are you within the bounds of the energy that you have to be supportive? And where are you disrespecting that? Right? Again, from this need for worthiness. So it's a design that also can have a lot of schemes and strategies and agendas, right, for these ends to find worthiness and so on. Um, Take a little pause there. Other thing I'll say, 59.6 Okay, this channel needs typically some co-regulation. So it is important to have people in your life that you feel safe with and comfortable with, right? And that can be a part of your co-regulation, whether you're a spouse or good friends or whatever that might be. And of course, you also need to learn to take care of yourself, but it is going to be, I mean, I am a 59.6, Teresa's a 59.6. I mean, we're very clear that 59.6 seeks co-regulation, with the other. So I'll just pause there. What came up for you in what I just said, Michelle?
So definitely the career that I most recently had as a physical therapist really spoke to that undefined ego. It was very hard to set boundaries in the clinic. It just
Mm-hmm.
was very difficult.
Yeah.
And it did burn me out to the
Mm-hmm.
point where I don't practice. I maintain my license, and people will still be like, "Oh, are you going to do physical therapy again?" And I feel like other people see it in me, and I'm still so burned out that I'm like, "No, I don't know
Uh-huh.
how to do it in a healthy manner yet. That
Yeah.
going back into that arena doesn't feel good for me."
Yeah. And fourth lines tend to overdo it, right? They're fixed, they're rigid.
Yeah.
Third lines bend, right? They're elastic. Fourth lines break.
Mhm.
One of the keynotes of a fourth line is fatigue and burnout and that kind of, so that's what would happen, to this chart. And the most important thing is your chart has some what we would call continuities between it. One is you're innocently motivated, which is the
Mhm.
path of being as an end in itself. And I'm sorry to say there's not a good example in the world to look at. The world does not foster innocence. It does not celebrate innocence. And yet innocent people are some of my favorite people. They can have great senses of humor, which is very innocent, right? But it's about laying down all your agendas, not only because you're innocently motivated, but also because you have two abstract channels and you have a very abstract incarnation cross. What does that mean? It means entering into the experience for its own sake, not to get anywhere. The devil for abstract circuitry is expectations, right? This, dangling a carrot, chasing this kind of idea of what you think you're going to get out of the experience. Instead, this is about regulating your nervous system so that you can be fully in the experience deeply, right? For its own sake. And then guess what? You'll get somewhere. It's going to take you somewhere. You know what else is going to take you somewhere? Relationships. The people that you're close to are going to change your identity. It's connected. They're going to change your location. They're going to change your role. And your identity is hinged on this rhythm. Your identity is a pattern, a generated pattern, a cyclically generated pattern. And you've got a certain schedule, a certain ritual that you abide by. And you know what I've seen with my clients? I've seen the people that have this 515 channel of rhythm. And if they say go on a family vacation where you've got, siblings and nephews and nieces and maybe grandparents and all this stuff, that's a lot. And it can really dysregulate you and it can break your rhythm. And then there can be a fallout after that vacation where you know what you've lost? Your sense of self. Because your sense of self is contingent upon honoring your particular patterns, whatever that looks like. And it's going to be extreme and it's going to change from time to time, but it has to change from your own inner authority, not from external pressures, right?
Yep. I have a younger sister with two nephews, and I go down and visit regularly. I've gone down 4 times since Christmas, and for about a week each time. And I have gotten sick, very, very sick every time. And I think it's because
Mm-hmm.
of that, because I default to their rhythm. They've got young kids, they have some structure they have to have, which I understand. But some of it has
Mm-hmm.
also been a little bit too much self sacrifice. That makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you.
Are you noticing any compromise in any joint inflammation, any type of maybe my back or my legs or stiffness or anything like that? Is that a thing that you're noticing? I don't know exactly how old you are. I mean, this might manifest more as you get a bit older, but
Um, Oh, you mean in general overall, or just with that specific situation I was talking about?
well, what I'm saying is that stress can show up and
Oh,
affect your mobility. It can show up in your in your back, in your bones, and legs and stuff
Gotcha.
like that. That's where it can build up.
Yeah. Um, no, I've had episodes of low back pain, and it definitely is completely correlated to deeply, deeply stressful times in my life. But
Yeah.
I've learned from it. I'm 46, so I have done some learning in my life, and I've been able to learn and kind of work through that. So
Yeah.
thankfully, right now, that's not something I struggle with.
Yeah, it would make, I mean, so I have some of the same indicators as you, and it's periodic. It's like every now and again. Often it'll be a relationship dynamic. Something's up in a significant relationship in my life, and my back gets locked up, and I need a
Yeah.
chiropractic adjustment, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a daily occurrence, but it's yeah, time to time. Um, yeah. So
Mine's more
Teresa,
systemic and like sinus related right now. Like my actually musculoskeletal, I'm pretty good.
mm,
Um, Mine's presenting a little differently.
mhm. Yeah. So Teresa, do you have anything that you notice or want to speak to?
Well, Michelle and I were talking earlier, and you had said something that really stood out to me where when you are in certain family environments, know, you don't feel safe. And you were saying you don't know that you've ever really felt safe. So something to maybe explore with that would just be kind of what I was talking about earlier, and to start notice where you could, it's like a practice that you have to do kind of daily of finding safety in your body, even if it's just the tip of your nose, right? And
Mhm.
starting to flex that like a muscle, because I would be curious to see what would happen when you're in that activating situation if you're to start trying to find safety in specific areas of the body
Mhm.
and not just recognizing it as globally unsafe, right?
Right.
And safety is a muscle that we have to flex. It's not something that is just like immediate, I can find that safety. It's a practice that I do every day and try to cultivate every day. And so I would just be really curious how that might shift things for you a little bit.
Cool. Thanks. I'll try that.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things is so Michelle is in Eden, like Teresa, as a matter of fact, although Teresa's personality sun is in gate 12, Michelle's in gate 6. So just by virtue of being in Eden, I mean, Ra even talks about difficulties in the pregnancy. They're kind of like, oh my God, I'm coming into the world of form, this world of imperfection, the Maya, but there's some sort of a situation in childhood. It's that fall from paradise, you know, and then it's a pursuit of trying to find that again. And you try to find it again relative to where the personality sun is at. Yours is in gate 6. So part of the healing that you're looking for in the world comes from intimate connection. And not just intimate connection, but someone that you can safely, very important word, you're a first line in gate 6, first line personality. Can I have safety in conflict? Is it safe to get close? Because conflict's important. Any relationship's going to have conflict, but can we do that in a way where the safety is preserved? As a first line, you're going to want to find safety through honesty and directness, forthrightness. Please just put your cards on the table. I don't want to feel like there's something that you're, I don't want to feel like there's something that you're, holding back, and you can, because you're also someone that is very a good energetic read of the other people because you have feeling cognition, you're reading the energy, you're intuitive because you have gate 28 and 57, right? It's there when you need it. And you're a 59-6. The really cool thing about being a 59-6 is it's both like having a defined emotional system and having an undefined emotional system. It's both,
Mhm.
right? You have your own emotional chemistry, and we're empathic. We're the aura breaker. We're going into their aura and we're feeling where they're at. Now,
Yeah.
it's not the same. It's not the same as amplifying. We're not amplifying, but we're picking up on that.
Mhm.
But so you're such a good read of people. So back to that first line, it's like, please just be straight with me because everything psychologically for you is like, is it safe? Is it secure? Is it solid? And that's not just because in human design, we often talk about the first line in terms of studying. They're investigating, they're becoming a subject matter expert. And that's true. But you also need safety everywhere in your relationships and with your employer, with everything, right?
And within yourself. And that's something that
Mhm.
I've seen a lot of, particularly 1/4s, a lot of 1/4s that I've worked with. It's almost like they kind of go on this journey of leaving their family and finding like that they're able to stand on their own 2 feet and kind of going through a character development of being able to do that and really
Mm.
feeling strong within themselves and then cultivating those relationships from that place and seeing what happens there. So, you might kind of be at that point in your journey where maybe you do feel safe by yourself and within yourself, but then you throw in the activation of your family and that throws you off. And so now you're kind of in this
Yep.
conundrum and this tension point because you're a 59-6, you want connection, you're here for connection, and yet you're trying to find safety within that connection. And so that's where working with your body really comes in, and also seeing you might be, it might help to start noticing what particular triggers come up within that family environment. Like what specifically creates that feeling of I'm not safe? Is it other people acting a certain way, or is it a specific somatic sensation that just comes up? And just kind of start to narrow it down there and collect that data.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. I will.
Yeah.
And the last thing I'll say is it's to notice the mind body link through all this, right? And so it's like when you don't feel safe, the chart says that one very probable way you're going to deal with it is I'm going to have a strategy. I'm going to have agendas. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to show that I'm, whatever, worthy of treating properly, worthy of love, all this kind of thing. And, or you could take things personally, which aren't personal.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank
Thanks,
you,
Michelle.
Michelle. Yeah. Thank you both, Sarah Jane and Michelle, for volunteering today.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions? You're starting to get a little bit of a sense of how we're combining these two fields, right? There's no precedent here for us. This is just what we have cultivated in our own practices and what we've developed in our client work. But no, there is no template for combining human design and somatics, and it's an exciting place to be. And it's clear to Teresa and I that it really is, it's the only way to really live the experiment as far as I'm concerned. I don't know
Yeah.
what else you can do.
Right. And like, I love how earlier you said using a gentle noticing when it comes to your not self and your design and your cognition, all the things. Somatics is the same way. And like, if we can just really get that etched inside of us, gentle noticing, that is such a
Mm,
good signpost and just a way to live by when it comes to your experiment and doing your somatic work. It's not forceful. It's not, I gotta make this happen or I gotta decondition. It's, I'm noticing these things. I'm
yeah.
exploring. I'm curious. I'm letting it emerge. And I think I don't know, it just feels like when I got into human design, it was like so hardcore, and I felt like it was this thing where I had to like perfectly be living my design and I had to be aware of my not self or else I'm gonna die. It's like Ra's so intense about
Uh-huh.
it. And it's just like, no, this is really meant to support us in our daily life and in our self-actualization. And we can go slow with it and we can take our time and really like let things emerge and really be with ourselves. And you can't force that and you can't rush that.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, guys, both in terms of your own deconditioning, you certainly can't rush it. You know, um, I had a really wise mentor slash doctor I was working with many years ago, and I would come to that conversation thinking we should do this or do that. And he said something very simple to me that always stuck with me. He said, "You're not presenting a reason to do what you think you need to do right now." My mind was getting ahead of the situation. So he basically was saying, look, you only do the work when you're available to do the work. I know exactly the last time I did trauma work was June 2019. I might do it again in 6 months. I might not do it for 5 years. I do it when there's something there to process. There's another layer available, right, to me. So that's on the deconditioning side of things. On the learning side of things, because I know some of you are very interested in learning human design and working with it professionally. Some of you might already be to an extent, right? Only go as far into the knowledge as you're genuinely curious and ready to bring it into your life. In other words, why would you read about Dream Rave if you're not really interested in tracking your dreams for a period of time? Because you know what? If you consume all that information and you're not really ready to extrapolate and bring it into your life, it's hollow, it's
Mhm.
flat, And you know what people tell me? They come to me for their second foundation reading or for their third foundation reading. And they say, you know what? I had these foundation readings and all people did was tell me the exact same stuff I read in the books. It hadn't been digested. Everyone's in such a hurry. Human design is so compelling. It's the ultimate candy store for the mind, right? It's got so many answers, right? Everyone's in such a rush. If you're meant to do this professionally, don't worry, it'll happen at the right time, but just go slow with all of it. The more that you can bring this into your body and into your actual life experience, the richer it's going to be, both for your own deconditioning and for your professional client-based work.
Yeah. And getting in touch with your body can also tell you when you need to pause with the information and when you need to integrate. And there's no downside to getting in touch with your body.
There's no
So helpful
downside.
in so many ways. And you can go at your own pace, and that's the thing. Your body is letting you know when it's ready for the next step or the deeper layer or more capacity or whatever. And just being in touch with it in that way allows you to be able to work with that in so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this is the real work. Ra, he knew it. He was pointing us to this nine-centered approach where you work with the body. He just didn't know how. That wasn't his thing in this life, and that's fine, And so we're filling in those gaps.
Totally.
So I see a couple things in the chat here. Jen said, I think environment is so important for the nervous system regulation, especially as someone who grew up with a narcissistic family. Emotional freedom technique, tapping has helped a lot too. That's a great tool.
Yeah, EFT is great.
EFT is really good. Yeah, environment, just both in a figurative sense and in the literal human design sense, absolutely important. Yeah. Especially when you're right centric, right? Because you're a sponge. Both Michelle's three parts, right? Sarah Jane is quadrite. So who is in their life, who they're around is everything. It's everything. Right. And so, for example, for Sarah Jane, she has to really feel safe enough. She has to really honor her energy and her splenic intelligence about what she's doing and who she gets close to so that she feels safe, because safety is so important for her as a first line as well. And she's got this first color, fear, motivation, and survival view. And she's got what's called a prime issue, which asks, am I safe with other people? Am I safe in this environment? So if she's really coming from the intelligence of her inner authority, right, then she can be in the right places around the right people, and then they're going to pull out her intelligence as a quad right, and she can slowly learn over time that, hey, it's okay to be myself as a quad right that's so sensitive with feeling cognition, picking up on so much from other people. Growing up as a child, I'm sure, and having gifts and capacities for perception that no one knew what to do with, right? That no one knew what to do with. Okay. Any final questions before we wrap up for today?
Jen had asked, can you share about the next analyst training?
Yeah, just briefly, we'll say that the next round of the analyst training is going to start in August. We're going to start talking about that publicly, probably early June. We are actually wrapping up the current cohort in July. But yeah, that next round will start in August. And if you've already been in touch with me and you're on the waiting list, I'll be in touch with you soon to schedule that one-on-one, because if we don't already know each other, we've got to meet. I just have to make sure that, one, you've got the savvy, you've got the knowledge to be able to handle it, where it'll be empowering for you. It's the next stretch that you're ready for. And two, that I have a response to support you, because the analyst training is a journey, my friends. And it's an analyst training and a deconditioning support program. All right. It's personal and professional development. And virtually everyone that I've trained so far over the past 3.5 years was shocked at what they learned about themselves after the first semester, which focuses on your psychology and the not self. So I want to make sure you're up for it, that you're up for going that deep. So if I don't already know you, I'll be in touch and we'll have a one-on-one for 30 minutes over Zoom and just make sure it's the right fit for you.
And then Sarah Jane said she has a question statement.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had one question. So I have acceptance sense, and I wanted to ask if that is one of the reasons why, um, like that, I actually feel very, very comfortable until represented with being made to make choices or decisions about this, that, and the other, when actually I'm quite comfortable with everything as it is. Does that ring related to that?
I think so. Yeah, I'd want to dive in a little deeper
Sure.
with you, but
Yeah.
I think that that certainly could be that, hey, I'm kind of coming to the situation with a general attitude of acceptance. Um, I would want to just make sure that there's no disassociation going on in some scenarios.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Definitely.
yeah, that's that's kind of I have a little bit of a hunch in the background that
Yeah.
sometimes there could be a bit of a checkout where you really should be standing in a position and saying, because Sarah Jane, the thing about this chart is boundary issues.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So
Things very
sometimes
clear.
I think you're probably right. You're accepting. And sometimes it might be like, I'm going to acquiesce, which is what the undefined solar plexus is going to do. I'm going to collapse my boundaries. You mentioned your stomach earlier. It can be a suppressing, I'm stuffing down, I'm swallowing my truth, I'm swallowing my truth, and that can for some people even manifest as stomach type related problems because you just keep stuffing it down
Mm.
rather than asserting your boundaries, right? You're swallowing something that you're not designed to swallow. In why? In order to be safe in your case.
Yeah. And working with your body there, again, I'm going to keep bringing it back to the body, but
Of
starting to
course.
notice, this is something we're going to do in EYD, but starting to develop this practice of knowing, what does a boundary feel like to me? What does a no feel like in my body? What does a yes feel like in my body? And am I uncomfortable with something here that I need to share or bring up? Like, do I have a boundary here that's being violated? If you're dissociated from that, you might not actually know that a boundary is being violated until way later on when things start to blow up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on point.
On point. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Any final questions? Jen said, I have the truth in confrontation. It's never as bad as we think. Yeah, very true.
Very true.
Could I
Betty,
ask
was
a
that you?
question?
Yeah.
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 It probably won't make much sense. I just kind of it's always just fascinating listening to you guys speak. I've really been enjoying your new podcast. And I just kind of wondered, in your experience of working with other people before, like how much of a shift do you sort of see like in the people that have gone through your teaching before, and like I kind of get the sense that your life might just completely shift or like almost burn down in like a sort of phoenix like way, but in a good way. But I just kind of wonder like how much what the experience of people has been like.
I mean, I can share because I started out as James's student.
Yeah.
And yeah, I went into it thinking I was just gonna like learn how to be an amazing analyst, and the not self portion of analyst training like completely shattered me. And I mean, that's what we start out with in semester one, and it pretty much just goes through all of your mental stories in a really deep way. And that was some of the deepest excavation work I've done for myself. So you're correct. And I think that's why James really has to like meet with everybody and read them to see if they're going to be ready for that. And then that's where I come in and helping people somatically move through that and having, these support sessions each week where we kind of dive into how we're feeling with what comes up and everything is what we realized we needed after me going through that first cohort and everything. And
Yeah. Yeah, the analyst training is not for the faint of heart. It's very, very confrontational. I mean, lovingly, but the information is what it is. It's a pretty big dose of truth, but that is why, as Teresa just said, there's hand-holding throughout it. It's can I support you? And can Teresa support you? Really going to meet with both of us, I should say. This will be the first time Teresa is with me in this on my team. So we need to both sign off on that. But with this work that she's bringing to it, it's creating a container of safety and capacity to really meet these truths about ourselves, right? In a way that we can handle, in a way that feels safe. Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
which is also why we created EYD. You know, it's not a requirement to do EYD to do analyst training, but we're hoping that a lot of people feel drawn to do this as a foundational support before they go into something like analyst training, if that feels correct for you. You might not need it, but we're really trying to, you know, set you up so that you feel like you can go through that type of development program.
Hmm. Yeah. Did someone else just ask a question?
I think so. Maybe somebody just doesn't have their mic off.
Yeah. Anything else? We can do one more question. It's good to be with you guys. We're not in a rush. Every question is, opening up really important stuff. So,
Yeah, we're really, Jen was just saying congrats on opening up this new area of work and sharing it. Yeah, we're really passionate about this. It's just I mean, to James, it was kind of a no-brainer. It was like, this is so obvious. Why is nobody, like, as fifth lines usually are, they're like, this is just common sense. This is obvious. Why isn't everybody else doing this? But maybe it's our journey to bring to the world and to really explore this in a deeper way. And it's really gratifying and it's experimental. We're getting to learn with you guys as we go through with a lot of the somatic integration stuff. So
yeah, I mean, this has been my thing for 5 years. I mean, it's how Teresa and I met at the conference when I was talking about this at the first High Desert Human Design Conference. Um, and it's great to now have allies. It's great to be able to talk about this publicly. It's great that people are starting to get it. How trauma and nervous system regulation is absolutely imperative to this important work, to the experiment.
yeah, and in my experience, I noticed a lot of people entering into the experiment in 2020 and 2021, like around that time, like a lot of the clients I've worked with entered in during that time. And I think people are getting to a point now where they're like 5 years into their experiment and they're
Yeah.
not necessarily seeing the changes that they want to see, or maybe like I'll speak for myself. I noticed 5 years in, I was like still as neurotic as before and not really seeing these big changes and still acting from my not self a lot. And I think that's where this is coming in at the right time because people are kind of primed and they're like, I've already taken in all this information. I've done all these courses. I've done all these readings and nothing's really changing. And so, what does it look like to actually decondition through our bodies and in a practical sense?
Yeah, I want to add to that my field research as well. I mean, so I've done over 1,000 readings, been to all of the High Desert Human Design conferences as a keynote speaker, led several retreats, been a participant on several retreats, and my overwhelming impression is people are just stuck in the same not self cycle. That's trauma, guys. It's a loop. And
Yep.
it's because, again, they might be aware of the mental story aspect, which is good and important and helpful, but they're not actually doing the somatic work, which is actually what creates more freedom, so to speak, in your body. It gives your body more room to choose. Not your mind, not your ego, more room to choose, but your body, your form has more flexibility, if you will, more adaptability, more mobility, right?
And you get to surprise yourself because what you'll find is your mind will have created a story like what Sarah Jane demoed, but then the sensation in the body doesn't actually match the story. And then you get to be curious about, oh, what happens when I actually go with the sensation and not automatically going with the mental story. And so we have to start separating that.
Mm-hmm. Sarah Jane just
Anna,
asked a question in the
oh,
chat. Sorry, then I'll get to Anna. Just saying, do we need a full not self reading? I mean, look, Sarah Jane, take it in stages. You
yeah,
might be ready for a full not self reading, but any one reading can't cover 100% of what's going on. It'll cover the major themes. But what we just talked about, Sarah, that's a lot of rich material
yeah.
for you. Just looking at the fear stories, the emotional overwhelm, right? The other side of what's going on in your psyche is what about my needs? So just these simple things, you can be working with that for a long time and just see through
Yeah.
strategy and authority when it's ready to take a deeper slice.
Yeah, and you're a first line. So it might be just like that foundational piece that you need to
Yeah.
start with, right? And it's like just taking it bit by bit, integrating that, and then taking another bit.
Mm-hmm. Anna.
Yeah, Teresa, I think you mentioned like the completely open ego and fawning.
Mhm.
And I also have a completely open ego. And I do, it's one of my strategies.
Mm.
And I'm interested in like, like, it's not obvious to me, like, what's the link between that strategy and having an open ego?
Yeah, so open egos are easily intimidated. And so, at least for me, like James using that wording, 'cause that's the wording I've heard him use for the open ego, has really helped me able to see, oh, I feel the sensation of intimidation in my body, and that feeling does not feel safe to me. And so then what I do is I fawn and I try to make the person like me and please them and acquiesce and not actually be honest with them, which actually creates a disconnect. So I'm not experiencing the connection and closeness that I want in my relationships. And I'm also feeling like I'm betraying myself a little bit because I'm not really being honest. And it's prevented me from truly listening to my authority because my authority could be saying, hey, actually, I need more time for this, or I'm actually a no to this. But then I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll do that because you want me to do that, or because I feel intimidated by
Oh,
you, or whatever. And um, I grew up in a family of defined egos. I was the only open ego in my whole immediate family. And so I really associated it a lot with the feeling that I felt around defined egos. And James and I were just talking about this earlier, but it took me moving out when I was 18 and having a roommate that was an undefined ego and actually not being around or defined egos all the time to notice the difference in my body. And I felt like I really got to meet who I really was without that constant ego definition. And so I think just that became a coping mechanism growing up was either fawning or fighting, right? Because I was either amplifying the ego definition and wanting to prove something and wanting to defend and fighting, or going into intimidation and acquiescing. So it's not that we're only going to have that one trauma response, but just having the awareness of what you tend to gravitate towards. And I feel like as an adult, the fawning happens more often than the fighting.
Thank you.
And for the
yeah.
record, this could also happen to defined egos. It really just depends
Hmm.
on what worked for you as coping mechanisms and trauma, like what survival strategies worked growing up. I just notice it's really common with open egos.
Mhm.
Yeah. And just to comment, Anna, so I'm doing a quick holistic analysis to see the tendencies, right? So it's never as simple as saying, oh, undefined ego equal fawning. But
Yeah.
what an undefined ego does indicate 95% of the time is feeling intimidated regularly. But there's other indications about, well, are you going to fight through
Mhm.
that intimidation, or are you going to fawn? So I'm looking at everything, substructure, all kinds of different things to see where are the tendencies. We can kind of talk it through, and it can go different ways. You can say, look, sometimes like Teresa is an example of someone who can get hypo or hyper aroused. She can really do a checkout, disassociative freeze kind of a thing, or sometimes she can get hyper aroused and really be a fighter. It can go either way.
I got 38 four times in my chart. So,
Yeah, and it's that,
there's
and it's
so many
substructure
things.
stuff. Yeah, it's substructure stuff too. But yeah, yeah. So it's exciting to see how it's all there. It's all in your design.
Yeah.
I've been slowly tracking nervous system data for years with clients, and and I teach this in analyst training as well, by the way.
Yeah. And I think
How yeah.
it helps our minds make the connections too. It's like, in EYD, we're going to teach you all the trauma responses, but then you get to start making the connections while learning alongside the centers and this deeper stuff with James. Start to make the connections, and like anybody could have any design and have any trauma response, but it's cool to be able to see, oh, that's where that's coming from. And then for me, I notice I get more into the fawning when I'm with a defined ego, but then sometimes there's a part of me that wants to assert myself, and it's just really interesting noticing how that comes up a lot more with defined egos than it does with undefined egos. Like I experience a lot more harmony and just like kind of flow with undefined egos, whereas I get taken to my edge with defined egos, and I'm surrounded by them. All my closest relationships are with defined egos, so I get to learn a lot.
And 4521s especially with
All
myself,
three of you.
your husband, your best friend. Yeah.
And
Yeah. You have some karma with
I'm
4521s.
compromised there with my hanging 45. So fun.
Hopefully we all still treat you like a queen.
Yes, that's true at least.
Okay, well, let's wrap up for today. This was a lot of fun. Look, we're
This was
both
great.
available by email in our DMs if you have any further questions about whether the course is right for you or not. The course starts Monday, June 2nd. So I think that's about 2 weeks from now. So if you're still in your process, you've got some time. And yeah, we're super excited to be bringing this to the field, and we hope you'll join this ride with us. Some vulnerable
Thanks so much.
participants that want to go deep.
Yeah. 259.6s. We're going to go deep.
It's going to be intimate. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
all. Yeah. See ya.